We have got to become totally committed to Christ and the work of the ministry. In this dark day, it's demanding of us, it's a demand upon us to be just like God. I represent the kingdom. I don't represent myself. I represent the Christ. I represent Jesus and him crucified. I represent love unfeigned. I represent peace that passes all understanding. I represent the God of all creation. We have a work to do for the kingdom before the return of Jesus Christ. Take it back, take everything back, take it all back. Grab a hold of what God promised you and take it out of the enemy's hands. Who am I talking to in this room? God has rendered the enemy powerless. We have to take on the very essence of Jesus when he was on this earth. Our job is to preach with one voice, the saving knowledge of Jesus Christ to a lost world. What is the work of the kingdom? To love everyone. Y'all don't hear me. He said, I gave you the power. Lay hands on the sick and it shall recover. These are the signs, the power that shall follow those who believe.
Welcome to Perfecting Faith Church, where ministry means people, and our pastor is Pastor Donnie McClurkin. I am Elder Sarudzai Makwande with the international team, and in a few minutes, you will be welcomed in different languages. Tinotenda vana veZimbabwe vari kunamata nesu nhasi, tinokugamuchirai nemuzita raJesu Kristu. Tinovimba kuti mucharamba muchinamata nesu. Munokwanisa kutiona paYouTube nepaFacebook. Musi wechitatu na 8 p.m. nemusi wesvondo na 11 a.m. Tinovimba kuti muchafara nekunzwa shoko raMwari. Pano ndipo pamusha penyu.
de parte del pastor Donald A. McClurkin Jr. y la iglesia Perfeccionando la Fe o Perfecting Faith Church, donde ministerio significa gente, deseamos invitarle a reunirse con nosotros en vivo en las redes, en Facebook o en YouTube. Nuestro horario de servicio es miércoles 7 p.m. hora del este y domingo 11 a.m. hora del este. Si desea contactar nuestras oficinas, estamos disponibles de lunes a viernes 9 a.m. a 5 p.m. hora del este. Nuestro número telefónico es 516-223-8300. Otra vez confirmando, 516-223-8300. Que Dios me lo bendiga y acuérdese, usted pertenece aquí.
Frères et sœurs, bonjour. Bienvenue dans l'Église de Dieu de Perfecting Faith Church qui est dirigée par pasteur Donnie McClurkin. Nous sommes contents que vous ayez décidé de monter live, brancher avec nous sur Facebook et sur YouTube pour venir adorer avec nous matin là. Pas oublier, invitez les amis, invitez toute famille, invitez tout le monde nous connaît pour venir monter live avec nous, pour venir adorer avec nous. Nous servons un gros bon Dieu. Pas oublier, bon Dieu, v'là là, ou méritez là. Grâce mon Dieu avec nous toutes. Amen.
Bom dia a vocês, meus amados irmãos brasileiros. Em nome de Jesus, queremos te dar as boas-vindas à Perfecting Faith Church. E por parte do pastor Donnie McClurkin, queremos convidar vocês a participar conosco dos cultos todos os domingos, a partir das 11 da manhã no Facebook e no YouTube. E também no estudo bíblico, todas as quartas-feiras, a partir das 8 da noite. E convide seus amigos, e não se esqueça, você pertence aqui. Deus te abençoe.
We shall overcome. We shall overcome. We shall overcome someday. Deep in my heart, I do believe that we shall overcome someday. We shall overcome. We shall overcome. We shall overcome someday. Deep in my heart, I do believe that we shall overcome someday. Deep in my heart, I do believe that we shall overcome someday. Deep in my heart, I do believe that we shall overcome someday.
God bless you. This is Pastor Donnie McClurkin, and it is my joy, my privilege, and my honor to bring your attention to the life, the ministry, and the mission of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. On this day that we're commemorating a great man that was born in 1929. On January the 15th, 1929, there was a male child born, not knowing that it was going to be a modern day 20th century Moses. This man would be born that would deliver people from bondage. This man would be born that would change the course of a world, as well as, and especially for, those of us here in the United States of America. His name is Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., a great man with a divine purpose, a purpose that superseded anything that could have ever been imagined. It was a man that had a goal that God had set in place to transform a nation, to make a cry that would call for justice that would circle the globe and surely impact these United States of America. Martin Luther King Jr., a man with a mission, a man with a purpose. Of course, we've gone through so many different transitions, so many different things have transpired in our lives. But me being of the age that I am, 62 years old, me being born in 1959, I was able to see, and I remember so many of the television news broadcasts of the civil rights movement and how it impacted the nation, how it had a nation divided, but a nation that united in the civil rights and for a good cause, for a great cause, for a holy cause.
I am happy to join with you today in what will go down in history as the greatest demonstration for freedom in the history of our nation. Five score years ago, a great American in whose symbolic shadow we stand today signed the Emancipation Proclamation. This momentous decree came as a great beacon light of hope to millions of Negro slaves who had been seared in the flames of withering injustice. It came as a joyous daybreak to end the long night of their captivity. But 100 years later, the Negro still is not free. 100 years later, the life of the Negro is still sadly crippled by the manacles of segregation and the chains of discrimination. 100 years later, this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal.
I remember being transfixed, sitting in front of the television with my mother, a young man, 4 years old, 6 years old, watching the march over the bridge, watching the water hoses, watching the dogs unleashed upon the protesters that protested peacefully. I remember being confused, not understanding what was going on and why it was happening. And I remember my mother explaining to me about this one man who was leading the charge by the name of Martin Luther King Jr. I remember how it impacted me. I remember the different threats that were going on. I remember how we were dealing with so many racial upheavals, and there were so many cries out against the Black Americans. There were so many different things that took place that did not give us equality. And my mother took the time to explain to a young man, a young preteen boy, about what was taking place in our world and in our country. And how she made me to understand that this man was causing attention to be drawn to injustices, that this man was raising his voice and leading a charge that would cause the lives of men, women, and boys and girls throughout this country to be transformed, to be transfixed, to be changed. One man. It's amazing how God can use one man to make such a great change and link so many great men and women to the cause that caused us to be able to live in this America. One man by the name of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.
I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today. I have a dream that one day every valley shall be exalted, and every hill and mountain shall be made low. The rough places will be made plain, and the crooked places will be made straight. And the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all flesh shall see it together. This is our hope. This is a faith that I go back to the South with. With this faith, we will be able to hew out of the mountain of despair a stone of hope. With this faith, we will be able to transform the jangling discords of our nation into a beautiful symphony of brotherhood. With this faith, we will be able to work together, to pray together, to struggle together, to go to jail together, to stand up for freedom together, knowing that we will be free one day. This will be the day. This will be the day when all of God's children will be able to sing with new meaning, "My country, tears of thee. Sweet land of liberty, of thee I sing. Land where my fathers died, land of the pilgrim's pride. From every mountainside, let freedom ring. And if America is to be a great nation, this must become true."
It's important that we remember this, that this day that we are celebrating, this MLK Day, that it comes with a great price. It comes with a hefty charge. It comes with bloodshed. It comes with marching. It comes with a mind and a determination to change things from the way that they were to the way that they should be. I want to remind every one of you that this man and the men that marched with him, they had a specific moniker. They had a specific position. In the civil rights movement of the 60s, just about every man that marched along with Dr. King, every one of them just about had a reverend in front of their name. Reverend Abernathy, Reverend Shuttlesworth, Reverend Jesse Jackson, and the list goes on. They had a holy calling. They had a divine purpose, and they understood that this was bigger and larger than any one man, but it took the one man to lead the charge. They prayed, they sought the Lord, they made sure that they peacefully protested and made their point and brought attention to injustice, but they did it in a holy way with a righteous charge. Yes, Dr. Martin Luther King, the modern day 20th century Moses, led a charge that caused attention to be drawn to the injustices and led us into a place of prominence that we now live. Yeah, it was amazing, but it's nowhere near over. It was amazing, and we remember it, and we memorialize it, but it's nowhere near over. Yeah, we still have to get to the point where we overcome. During the march, there was so great a cloud of witnesses that marched along with this great man. from celebrities to dignitaries, white, black, yellow, brown, red. It was a massive move, a massive move. And it took the grace of God in order to make this happen. It took the grace of God in order to bring this about. It had to be God. For all that was in jeopardy, it had to be God. For all that was in place, it had to be God. For the sacrifice that was going to be made, it had to be God. For men and women to forget about their own safety, to make sure that the righteousness and the civil rights of all were upheld, it had to be God. And so we commemorate this day. We commemorate the move. We commemorate the mission. We commemorate the man, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Yeah, many have risen up since then, and many things have taken place. And now in this 21st century, we find ourselves almost in the same situation, having these different nuances that are causing us to go backwards in time. The redistricting of many different places so that the voters cannot adequately vote. The voters' right bill being held up in Congress. We're dealing with so many different things that have the reminiscence of the civil rights movement of the 1960s. Many things have changed, but there's so many things that are egregiously wrong. But we must remember the man. We must remember the mission. We must remember the ministry of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And we must move on and make sure that everything that has been fought for, everything that men have bled for, everything that Dr. King died for, continues on through us, continues on with a total commitment from every one of us to never let that happen again, to live free, to demand equality, to righteously stand and declare the will of God for every man to be treated equally. That's our job. That's our position. That's the purpose. That's who we are. I was blessed to be able to become very, very endeared and close friends with Mrs. Coretta Scott King. I was blessed to be able to sit at her feet and her to call me son. I was blessed to be able to hear her give me story after story of Dr. King. I'm blessed to know her daughter, Bernice. I'm blessed to have been able to sit in her presence and to be able to glean from her and to hear the riveting tales of this great man. To not only hear the tales, but have the humanity of him revealed to me. And it was Bernice King, his youngest daughter, that reminded me just a few years ago that everyone lauded Dr. King as the civil rights movement, this civil rights leader, but they forgot that he was a man of God. They forgot that he was a pastor of a church. They forgot that he was a preacher of the gospel. And that's what made him so significant, is that he held up a banner that could only come from God. He spoke the word, not just as an orator, but as a preacher of this gospel. And he preached the good news of equality. He preached the good news of the civil rights that are due to every man. He preached the good news of the love of God. Yes, Bernice King, I agree with you. He was much more than just a civil rights leader. He was a preacher of the gospel. And that gospel, that good news, is what we commemorate. That great man is what we commemorate. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. If it had not been for God choosing that man, there's no telling, there's no accounting as to where we would be in this America. After over 400 years of enslavement and inequality and inequity, there's no telling where we would be. But in 1963, he stood in Washington, D.C. and declared that he had a dream, and that dream must come to pass. That dream must come alive again. He was more than just a dreamer, Martin the dreamer. No, he wasn't a dreamer. He was a visionary. Dr. King wasn't a dreamer before. He was not asleep. He was a visionary who God had given vision to and given a mission to. And we honor that vision. And we honor that visionary. It was in 1968 that he stood in Mason's Temple, Church of God in Christ in Memphis, Tennessee, and gave his final prophetic message. The final prophetic message. And he said that I may not get to the promised land with you, but his eyes had seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. And the next day he went into eternity in that April morning of 1968. And although his life ended there, his words, his impact was indelible. It was indelible. It could not be washed away. Extinguishing his life could not wash away or wipe clean or change the course that was set by Dr. King. He was a man that was anointed by God. And then when God took him home, he left us to carry the banner. The banner did not drop to the ground. The banner did not fall to the ground. But we, the sons and daughters of Dr. King, we, the generations that were spurred on by Dr. King, we lift up a banner and we refuse to ever fall prey to inequality again. And it may cost some of our lives. It may. But you have got to believe that this God that called us into being, who empowered us to deal with 400 years of slavery and still survive, and not only survive, but thrive, and to rise up and to become the men and women of strength, the men and women of creativity, the men and women educated, the men and women gifted, the men and women that could build a nation. We will not fail to continue to push forward the dream, nay, the vision of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. So as I close right now, we remember the different portions of the speeches, the riveting words that he spoke. We remember the mind, the heart, the mission accomplished by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And then we sit back and we see that we've got farther to go, but we shall overcome. Deep in my heart, I do believe that we shall overcome someday.
Let freedom ring from Stone Mountain of Georgia. Let freedom ring from Lookout Mountain of Tennessee. Let freedom ring from every hill and molehill of Mississippi, from every mountainside. Let freedom ring, and when this happens, when we allow freedom ring, when we let it ring from every village and every hamlet, from every state and every city, we will be able to speed up that day when all of God's black men and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, will be able to join hands and sing in the words of the old Negro spiritual. Free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, we are free at last.
MLK Day, we want you to know that the dreamer's dream still goes on. It's going to get better after a while.